Hey, what's up, everyone? Tedrick85 here, and today I'm going to be talking about Alien Covenant. This film is a sequel to the 2012 film Prometheus, as well as the prequel to the first Alien movie. It stars Michael Fassbender, Catherine Waterston as terraforming expert Daniel Branson, the wife of former Captain Jacob Branson, played by James Franco, Billy Crudup as current Covenant Captain Christopher Oram, and Danny McBride as Covenant Pilot Tennessee. I admit, when I saw the Last Supper prologue and the two trailers that came out for this movie, I was so stoked to see it. I have been a fan of the Alien series since I watched the first one when I was a small boy, and I've watched every movie in the series since. I've finally gotten around to see this movie, not once but twice, and I've had the same feeling each time I saw it, and that is, I'm a bit ambivalent to it. It's not as good as the first two Alien movies, but overall, I don't think it's nearly as bad as what people are making it out to be. Come to think of it, I think that's one of the movie's main problems, is that people were walking into the theaters thinking this movie is going to be up to par with the first two Alien films. And if you're one of those people, then chances are you will be a bit disappointed with this movie. For this review, I will be talking about what I liked about the film and what I didn't like about it. Overall, this film feels like a mixed bag to me, and like I said before, I have conflicting feelings towards it compared to the other Alien films. First, I'm going to talk about what I liked about the movie and what I think it did right. I like to think that Ridley Scott did with this movie as J.J. Abrams did with The Force Awakens, and that is, he reminded everyone what they loved about the first two Alien films, and even what people seem to like about Prometheus, even though that movie is extremely polarizing in the fan base. Before anyone says anything, yes, I know James Cameron directed the second movie and not Ridley Scott, but there are some parts in this movie that reminded me of Aliens. I have to echo the words of Peter Bradshaw's review for The Guardian, where he refers to the film as a greatest hits compilation of the other Alien films' freaky moments. And considering this film was marketed as an Alien film, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I also really like the cast in this movie, and notice I said cast and not characters, which I'll talk about later on in this review. Besides Michael Fassbender, the one cast member that really impressed me in this film was Billy Crudup. I could just tell just by watching his performance in this movie that he's an actor that just gets it. Anyone that has watched any of his other movies, including Almost Heroes, Waking the Dead, Rudderless, and even Watchmen, can tell you he's got acting chops. What I really appreciate about Crudup is that, besides saying so in interviews, I could tell he absolutely loves this franchise and he delivers a pretty respectable performance as Oram. Another thing I found appealing about this movie is the introduction of the Neomorphs. I'll be talking more about them later on in my review, but I like how there was a new creature introduced into the series. That's actually one of the things I really liked about Prometheus, not to stray too far off subject, but I thought the Hammerpedes, the Trilobite, and the Deacon at the end of the film were pretty awesome. And I should mention that I thought the facehuggers in this film were freaking amazing. I had a fear of them when I was younger, and I still think they're freaky as hell, but this film makes them even creepier than what I could have imagined. The scene where Oram gets face-hugged in David's chamber was very unsettling to me due to seeing his character writhing, trying to get it off, as well as the sound effects. But I really appreciated it because it's supposed to be the emotion I should be feeling watching a sci-fi horror movie just like this one. The combination of practical effects and CG for the facehuggers were very well done in my opinion. This is illustrated in the scene where Demian Bashir's character, Sergeant Lope, gets attacked by a facehugger. The film does an awesome job showing just how fierce they can be when stalking and attacking their prey. One of the most memorable moments of the film for me was the birth of the chestburster. I found the scene to be both beautiful and poignant, and it also gave me the sense that something big just happened. I have to attribute this to the music in this scene. Speaking of the music, Jed Kurzel did an amazing job with the soundtrack to this entire movie, and I found that the music fitted nicely with almost every scene in the film. I also felt, for the most part, the film captured the isolated, creepy, and ominous tone that made the first Alien film memorable. I say for the most part because I thought the first hour and 15 minutes of the film had a pretty good pace to it. It reminded me again of Prometheus, how everything was building up to where the humans learn about the engineers, and then they find the black goo and all hell breaks loose. And I have to admit that, as predictable as it was, I really enjoyed the ending of this film. I always like when not every movie has a happy ending, and Alien Covenant certainly qualifies as one that does not have a happy ending. I also feel it sets up nicely for a sequel, though I read that the next film in the series, Alien Awakening, will chronologically take place before this one, so I'm not sure how that's going to work out. I found the ending to be quite chilling, as Daniels goes into hypersleep knowing that it is David, not Walter, that will be around while she and Tennessee are in grave danger, as long as he is around. David is seen regurgitating two facehugger embryos and placing him in with the frozen human embryos. I also like the fact that the music, especially David, the music that he chose there, fit in quite nicely, and it really added on to that creepy feeling that the ending provided. Now I'm going to be talking about what I didn't like about the film, and I have to start with the one thing that has been eating away at me after seeing this movie 2 times. And that is, I really don't like the direction that this series is going, especially after how things turn out in this film. I have to elaborate on this by talking about Michael Fassbender, who I feel represents the best and worst of this movie. For me, he is by far the best actor in this film, and he does a superb job playing not one, but two androids. David from Prometheus and a new android named Walter, who is void of having any real emotion. I liked him as Walter more in this film, but it's his portrayal as David as to why I didn't mention Fassbender earlier in this review. My big problem with Alien Covenant is that it is far too centered around David. In all honesty, this movie should have really been titled David Covenant, because he was pretty much front and center as soon as things started going wrong for the crew of the Covenant on Planet 4. It's bad enough that the film is centered around an android when the name of the movie has the word alien in it, but the fact that it essentially shows that David is the creator of the xenomorphs feels completely wrong to me, and it takes away from the mystery that the alien species has had since the first film. It just seems like a cop-out to me having an android of all things being the one that creates this deadly organism. Then I read the novelization of this movie, and I'm so glad I did, because the novel completely contradicts what is implied in the film by stating that the engineers created the xenomorphs instead. Having the engineers create them just makes much more sense to me because not only are they the ones that had the black goo, but there was also that one mural in Prometheus that had what looked like a xenomorph on it. So how could David have created the xenomorph himself when there was already a depiction of one inside the Juggernaut in Prometheus? I know that what is shown in the films is considered canon, but in this instance, I'd like to side with how the novel handled the origins of the xenomorphs. It may seem petty, but I think this whole David thing is keeping me from saying that this is a really good movie. Another big problem I had with this film was how quickly the facehugger was able to impregnate Sergeant Lope. Besides the fact that the scene only lasted about 10 to 15 seconds, the facehugger wasn't even latched completely onto his face. And if you listen closely, you can actually hear him scream, "Get it off! Get it off!" Meaning, not only wasn't the facehugger completely attached to him, but it didn't even have its proboscis down his throat. Yet, he is shown later on having a chest burster having been born from his chest. It's almost as if Scott forgot how the conception and gestation of the xenomorphs work. People complain about the Alien vs. Predator movies for how fast the xenomorphs gestated and grew, but this film takes that on a whole other level. Speaking of gestation, the fact that the chestburster emerged from Aurum almost already fully developed left me scratching my head too. I understand that this was the first xenomorph ever, aka the protomorph, but it just seemed really weird to me, especially after watching all of the other films. Another thing that's been eating away at me about this film is how little we learn from what happened to the engineers and Elizabeth Shaw. To me, it seems like Ridley Scott just threw them in the back burner but remembered them only long enough to kill them off. I kind of figured Shaw wouldn't be alive in this movie, but the way she is shown in this movie diminishes how unique and strong of a character she was in Prometheus, going from the sole human survivor of the Prometheus to being relegated to being David's lab rat in order to create the xenomorphs. As for the engineers, I find it hard to swallow that David managed to wipe out an entire species just in one area. You mean to tell me that every last engineer of the universe was right there at the same time? Even the engineers themselves look different from what they did in Prometheus. I've heard people say that they may be a subspecies of engineers or something in that order, but I personally think that the engineers in this film and in Prometheus are one and the same. For example, the aliens look different between the first and second films, but that didn't mean they were two different species or subspecies. Another thing I didn't like about the film was the fact that Ridley Scott felt the need to include the shower scene in this movie. I thought this scene was really stupid, to be honest with you. And even worse, it didn't even make sense. How on earth can two people make love in a shower and everyone around them is getting killed or disappearing? I really don't see why this was even in the film at all, and it really made the film almost feel like a B movie. I mean, for someone that has the prestige or whatever you want to call it, like Ridley Scott, he really should have known better than this. Speaking of which, I think the characters could have been far more developed than how they were portrayed in the movie. It just seems that most of the characters in this movie are either really stupid or simply there to be fodder for either the neomorphs or the xenomorphs. I think it's sad that we found out more about the crew of the Covenant in the Last Supper prologue than what we did the entire movie. Heck, we see James Franco more in the prologue than what we did in the movie, which almost makes his casting seem like a waste. I found it interesting in the prologue, though, where Franco's character Branson says that he's burning up, and I think this is rather interesting considering. I think it provides a bit of foreshadowing as to what his fate would ultimately be in the movie. Earlier, I had praised Billy Crudup for his performance in this film, but I feel it could have been even better if his character was written a bit better. Captain Orem is supposed to be portrayed as a man of faith, but the movie doesn't go anywhere near as deep with this as Prometheus did with Elizabeth Shaw. I think Orem could have been a rather compelling character, but it almost seems like Ridley Scott bailed on developing the characters in favor of making time for the neomorphs and the xenomorphs. Despite the characters being underwritten in this film, I feel that the cast did the best they could given the quality of the writing. I thought Catherine Waterston did a good job trying to set herself apart from Sigourney Weaver and Noomi Rapace, and I actually thought Danny McBride fitted nicely into this movie as well, despite him being considered a funny guy in all of his other previous movies. I know I had praised the CG the film did on the facehuggers, but I thought the CG they did with the neomorphs and xenomorphs looked really bad. I'm not a fan of CG to begin with, especially when it's used to replace practical effects. One of the things I loved about the first two Alien films was their use of practical effects, and I really wish we would have seen that in Alien Covenant, especially during the final 15 to 20 minutes of the film where the remaining crew members of the Covenant are fighting the xenomorphs. Admittedly, one of the few things I didn't like about the commercials for the film was how fake the neomorph's mouth looked. I really wish they would have done practical effects for them as well. To me, monsters just aren't that scary when you know that they are computer generated. Before anyone says anything, yes, I know that they had people wearing alien suits to do the scenes with the actors and then implement the CG in the editing. But the fact that the audience doesn't get to see something chasing the audience that is tangible is really disappointing. I had praised the film earlier for having a good pace to it in the first hour and 15 minutes or so, but I thought the last half hour to 40 minutes felt extremely rushed. Not only did everything feel slapped together, but what was slapped together was predictable and sloppily put together. I appreciate that the movie wanted something climactic by having Daniels and Tennessee take on the xenomorph at the end, but I think they could have done a better job with it. Ridley Scott recently revealed that he trimmed over 20 minutes of footage from the final cut, and I think that this was a big mistake. And I wonder if the cut footage contained anything that would have made the last act of the movie any better. Like I said, it just felt rushed and sloppy to be frank. Overall, I think that the impression this film will leave on the franchise is that, while it has elements that fans cherish from the other films, it really doesn't bring anything new and exciting to the table. And the fact that Ridley Scott has more or less stated that David created the xenomorphs is really going to have people question how this movie is going to pave the path to the original Alien movie. Sure, this movie answered some questions, but it also created numerous new ones. Questions that people preferably would have liked to have been answered sooner rather than later. The worrisome thing about this movie is that, while critics have been generally positive about the movie, it hasn't come close to the success that many had thought it would have in the theaters, and it leaves the future of the franchise into question. Unless Ridley Scott has a few tricks up his sleeve and has any future Alien films linking up nicely to the first Alien film, I want to think of this movie as more of a reboot of the series rather than a prequel. Not only does this let me not dwell too much on the negatives of this movie, but also lets me keep the sense that anything that happened from Aliens on is still canon, including the Alien Queen. I think this movie is okay and a decent movie to watch in a theater, But it's definitely a movie I feel that will be as polarizing, if not more so, than Prometheus. And that's probably the last thing Ridley Scott wanted when making this film. To be honest, I think after seeing this, I think I would have rather seen what Neil Blomkamp would have done with his Alien 5. Though sadly, I highly doubt that movie will see the light of day. I know Blomkamp himself said that the movie was pretty much dead. But I would rank this movie as the third best in the franchise. It's nowhere near as good as the first two, slightly better than Alien Resurrection, and miles better than Alien 3. I don't hate Alien Covenant, but I don't love it either. For me, it's a very okay movie. Thanks to you guys so much for listening to this, and I will see you guys again next time.